Hello, everyone. We are back. Another episode of In the Design Lounge. And this is probably one of the specialist episodes I've had, right? Because obviously, we talk about a lot of people in the design industry. What better person to talk to in the design industry than the CEO of Grey Magazine herself, Shawn Williams? I'm excited to have you on. For those that don't know who you are, explain who you are and kind of what you do.
Uh, Well, I'm Shawn Williams. I founded Grey Magazine in 2011, and our whole mission is to focus on the design industry, raise the profile of great designers, and share the importance of quality design.
Absolutely. Now, 2011, when you launched, a little bit different landscape. But you've now been in business for 13, 14 years, if my math is correctly. What has been the biggest change you've seen over the last decade? And then, as a part B to that question, what do you expect to see over the next decade?
Uh, gosh, so much has happened. It's hard to even think back to 2011. I mean, even since the pandemic, it feels like it feels like
Right?
a decade ago.
With the pandemic myself, I'm always like, okay, was that 6 months ago or 4 years ago? And then I'm like, oh my
Right,
goodness, this is like my entire idea of time has totally shifted.
right. Like it totally feels like, exactly what you said. Like it could have easily have been last month, but also
Exactly.
10 years ago, like simultaneously. Crazy experience. Well, let's see. I mean, a lot has happened in the design industry over the past decade plus. I mean, sustainability is, has always been important, but is just, completely a way of practice for everyone now. 3D printing, AI, augmented reality, just so much. But I would say one of the things that I really notice a lot more recently would be human-centered design. So
Okay.
that's where, you know, sort of it's people first thinking, and really, it's part of imagining how someone is going to use and experience and anticipate what needs they're going to have while they're in that space as they move through it. So it's part of every step of the design process. So things like, Netflix and Airbnb are
Yeah.
great examples of that. Um, there's a project, I mean, I don't remember what year, but there's a great example in architecture and design is this assisted living facility in, I think it's Ohio, and I'm not
Okay.
sure who the architect is, but they designed this whole neighborhood around this assisted living facility in the style of like 1930s, 1940s, which would have been, typically where a lot of these memory care patients grew up. And
That's
so
super cool.
it just helps them along the way. And so it's really interesting to see developments like that.
And what do you think? What do you expect? And what's on the horizon? I mean, obviously, I know Gray's at the forefront, but what have you been seeing down the pike, and what do you expect? Is it going to be more like people first design and development, or where do you think see it shifting?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're very heavy on human-centered design and sustainability, environmentalism. I mean, we're talking about building living structures on Mars and on the moon, and certainly those are all designed, with, the user experience at the forefront.
Totally. So I don't know if you just have impeccable timing or whatever it is, but you launched 2011, right post like recession. Yes, you know what I mean. I know I launched my first company during like 2009, and at that time I thought I knew everything, and I'm like, oh, I know nothing, and I'm in the middle of a recession. What is going on? So you launched in 2011. Obviously have sustained, and now it's 2024. You made it through. Now on the other side of the pandemic. What would you say contributor or attributes you've had that's allowed you to have staying power? Because again, this might not be the last thing we go through, but you've weathered now two things, and you're still here.
Well, knock on wood. Um, well, I started Gray because of the economic recession that we had at that time. I mean, the
Yeah.
the recession sort of moved through the US. kind of, at least as I experienced it, it moved sort of from the East Coast to the West Coast. And so here in the Pacific Northwest, we were kind of on the tail end of that. I was a casualty of the recession. I lost my job. But the worst part for me was that the design community in the Seattle area lost a really good home design magazine.
Okay.
And, I felt like I watched these architects and designers, they got really beat up through the recession and um, needed some spotlight.
Yeah.
They needed a platform to help tell their stories and show their work and, and to be part of that community. And so, I mean, maybe timing wasn't the best, but at the same time, I just felt compelled. I kind of looked around. We need a magazine for this area. What are we going to do? Um, and stepped up to it. But I wanted to do things a little different. And
Totally.
it was very, having, recently been laid off from my job due to the economy. Um, I was very sensitive and methodical about, how can I structure a business in media? I mean, the media industry, was challenged then as it is now. Um, how could I develop a company in the media industry um, that not only supports our target community, but also, helps us in the best way possible to survive should another recession hit.
Yeah.
And so to me, that was, number one, differentiate. Gray came out with a different voice than we've had here. We tried to be a little, like really authentic and casual in tone, like we're talking to our friends.
Yeah.
Um, and
Hence in the design lounge.
yeah, hence in the design lounge. We get very casual here. Um, and so, and then, just sort of in the product type, we cover not just residential, but commercial. We cover architecture. We cover fashion. I mean, we really try to, you know, again, like a friend, understand our friends out there, our audience out there. And we know that they're interested in more than just beautiful interiors and architecture. They're also paying attention to, great fashion and, all of that is a part of their lives. And so that's how we set ourselves apart to come out, you know.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think all those, and I've had these conversations numerous times with people in the design community. It's so much overlap between the fashion and the
Mhm.
architecture and the interior design and the commercial design and everything else. And so it made sense now looking back in hindsight, it makes sense to converge all those different mediums, all those different industries together. But maybe 10, 14 years ago, that wasn't the case. Talking about print,
People didn't get it at first, like,
yeah.
what is this about? Is
Was
it
it a
a
learning curve?
Is it fashion? We're like, just hang in there. Read the magazine.
It will make sense eventually. It will all make sense eventually.
Yeah.
Uh, but talking about that, talking about trying to innovate, maybe if you will, in an industry, but also just the ability of pivoting, right? We talked about print, we talked about digital. Now it has changed a little bit over the past few years, especially I think was accelerated through the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Is it digital first? Is it print? How does print live within a digital space? How do you know as a business owner when to pivot? What are those cues that you're looking for so that you aren't too late? And if you could even share a time maybe when you realize, oh man, maybe I should have pivoted a little bit sooner. And what are some of the things that you might have overlooked that someone that's watching or listening to this can be like, okay, I feel this thing in my stomach, but I don't have the urge to move yet. What are some things you saw that's allowed you to pivot and also when you pivoted too late?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's the $1 million question is when to pivot. When is it too, when have you gone too far? Needed to
Mm-hmm.
pivot sooner. There's no, I mean, there's no easy answer. And I think you have to understand, well, why are you pivoting? Is it, because the whole world shut down as it did, in during COVID-19? Is it, a financial need to pivot? Is it, just kind of a changing world? You know, or is it, I mean, is it a need or is it a want? You have to kind of go through all of those different exercises. And, I mean, if I'm being honest, I think I probably wait too long to pivot. um, I really, I spend my time really, methodically thinking through different scenarios and, vetting out any sort of concept. But once I'm there, I move quickly.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's like you said. I think if you had that magic ball, that would be a whole business in itself, right? When to pivot, when not to pivot, when to double down, when not to double down. When do you
Yeah.
think you've gone too far? I mean, that's the question. And honestly, and it's so hard, right? It's so hard to know when you should change course of action because
Yeah, and I
inevitably,
think I think it really comes down to kind of your gut instinct, I mean, these things.
yeah,
You know when it's time, really. As an example, we started out Gray Magazine in the Pacific Northwest, focused editorially exclusively on the Pacific Northwest.
okay,
But it was time to expand our market. This was a financial need. We kind of outgrew our market. I had big plans, great things ahead that I wanted to do. But we were kind of limited. We wouldn't be able to do it at the quality that I would want to do it. Um, and so it was time to scale. And so I had to, think about what, that may do, good or bad, for the brand as it is now. And also, how am I going to pivot? I looked at starting, new regional magazines around the country, but ultimately decided, just to do this one thing really well.
hmm
Unfortunately, I timed it to launch in January 2020. So
I
again,
told you that impeccable timing, impeccable timing.
impeccable timing. But actually it really helped us because one of the first things we did during the pandemic lockdowns was we just started live streaming conversations
Totally.
with people on Instagram Live, and it opened up because we're now international. It made sense for us to talk to people around the world, and so we had great conversations with designers, everywhere, London, Amsterdam, South Africa, we're all over. And we also launched in the design lounge during that time too, which also, was a great way for us to put Pacific Northwest designers on the same conversation with
Okay,
designers
yeah.
in parts of the world, for some really great, perspective and insight.
Yeah, I think it's always key, regardless whether you're pivoting or not, is finding the opportunity in the crisis. Hopefully it's not a crisis, right? But
Right.
finding the opportunity and then also finding the staying power within that. I myself was introduced to Gray. I was introduced to Gray the magazine first, but the events, the activations. And one of the first things I remember was the inaugural Gray Awards. I mean, now you've gone on to do Destination Design Con. You just recently launched the five city interior design tour. What is the importance, especially now when everything is digital, when everything is, virtual, if you will, of in-person activations, in-person events, building a community? And do you think it's more important than ever?
Yeah. I mean, of course, I think it's more important than ever.
Yeah.
And maybe especially since the pandemic, when we've all, turned to digital more than ever. We're online, the doors have opened, we're having live conversations online. Social media has been huge, but there's just nothing like in-person human connection. You have the opportunity for conversations, kind of, off the cuff insights that maybe you wouldn't get otherwise. And you also, like with the case of the interior design tours, you get to go and physically be in these spaces and experience what it was designed for,
hmm
and see and touch the textures, and it's just a Whole different
It's,
story.
it's
Totally.
without question. I feel like, where the online space has made everything so tangible, so available, if you will, and it's made the world smaller. But it's nothing
Yeah.
like that face to face interaction. You know what I mean? That face to face, as I used to say in networking, shaking hands and kissing babies. Right?
Yeah.
There's nothing like that. You can't do that in a virtual space. You have to be in person. You mentioned the interior design tour, and one of the things I thought was unique about that is that it focused on the interior designers, and it was not only commercial but also residential. So it's different types of buildings, different types of design. What was your thought process in focusing on the interior designers instead of like the builders? Because a lot of home shows, you mean obviously the interior designer is an aspect of it, but they might not necessarily be the featured aspect of it. What made you guys make that decision?
Well, we partnered on this with the Modern Architecture and Design Society. They are a really great company. They produce tours all over the country, and I think and they have done some in Canada too.
Okay,
Um, and we've been a media sponsor of the tours for at least a decade now.
gotcha.
And we get along so great with their team. And, we've always kind of wanted to do something custom together. And, they're already doing home architectural home tours. And so we thought, well, what we could do different, what Gray could bring to the table is that we could focus on interior design, but like the magazine and all of our channels, we would be able to cover commercial and residential. There's a lot of crossover in design inspiration. So, we just thought this would be a great sort of full service way to really offer a lot to people that wanted to go and see really great design in person.
Absolutely. I know Seattle just concluded. There's a couple other ones in the year that are still coming about, correct?
Yeah, we have Portland and San Francisco.
Okay.
Portland is mid-September and San Francisco is mid-October.
So now if you just have a Scottsdale, Arizona one, I'll be right here close. I can, go in, I can touch it, I can see it, I can experience it myself. Maybe go live. I'm just throwing it out there. You never know. Uh, but but as a woman-owned business, right? The landscape has changed considerably since 2011. Hopefully for the better, but we know everything hasn't been fixed yet. But being yourself a new entrepreneur at that time, what would you say to yourself at 2011, looking back over the past 13, 14 years? And also, what would you say to someone that's thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, specifically in the design industry in 2024?
I guess don't do it. No.
That is the real answer, though. That is clearly, if you knew how hard it was, trust me. But
Um,
oh,
no. Well, I guess to myself in 2011, and to anyone who may be like me starting out now, I would say, be confident, and trust your instincts, and you know, don't don't feel like you have to apologize for the visions that you have. If you have this great vision for a company or a product or an idea, no matter how out there it may be, do your homework and go for it.
yeah. No, and I think, it's funny you say don't do it. I mean, I think for those that is the real thing. Even the people that love to do it. And I will say, preface it with this. People that are wired that way to consider it, it is the hardest decision and the most difficult thing you ever will do. Yet at the same time, it's the most fulfilling. Right? Like, even though you might hate it 99% of the time, it is that 1% that you're like, oh, this is why I do it. This is why I enjoy it. And into a way, you wouldn't do anything else. Like, you wouldn't have it any other way. Like even though it's so difficult, you wouldn't have it
Yeah.
any other way.
Yeah. I mean, as a small business owner, I
Yeah.
think the hard things are just so much harder when you're
Yeah.
the business owner. But yeah, but then the rewards are, just that great. I mean, we had, in the first issue of Gray Magazine, the first issue out, I wanted to really make a statement and really give people an example of how Gray would be so different. And so we included a story, about this architect in Seattle, Rex Holbein, and he would take pictures of homeless people as they passed by his office.
Okay.
And he just and he brought just such a light to them just by stopping to say hello and asking if he could take their picture. It just changed, their whole,
Just being acknowledged.
yeah, being recognized. It was so important. And the portraits were beautiful. And so we're, getting ready to run with this story. And the advisors that I had at the time, they were like, what are you doing? Don't, this is a design magazine, why are you running portraits of homeless people? But it's such a part of the fabric of the design industry and who
Mhm.
we are talking to. Not only was it an architect that took the pictures, but it was very much a part of um just who we are on a human level, designer or not. And
Totally.
I thought it was important, to kind of right out of the gate say, look, this is a very different magazine than you're used to seeing in this space. And so, that was all great. But years later, probably, 8 years later or so, um, I ran into somebody, a builder's spouse, who
Okay.
told me that because of that first issue, they reached out and connected with that architect to connect with some of these homeless people, um, and offered, jobs to them.
Yeah.
And they, were and became incredible assets to this company. And to hear that years later, that sort of, I mean, it's just so that matters.
Totally.
And to
And
know that you've been sort of this catalyst for something of that scale. So those things mean a lot,
yeah.
those sort of triumphs, I guess.
And that's that 1% I was talking about, right? And that's also the things where I used to tell people, as on my background in fashion, people might look at design and think of fashion or style or architecture, how these buildings are shaped. And they look at it from a frivolous perspective, right? Because it can seem on its surface sometimes just vain. But then when you get the core of it and the reason behind it and how much you're impacting and how much it impacts other people, those are the things where you're like, okay, this is a need. This is not just a want. This is a need, and it's a need to have these things. I would also just add to what you said. If you are starting a new business, find a community. I know for myself, and I have these conversations, and not just a community of a tribe that you work with, but a community of entrepreneurs. Because people don't understand, like, you are the 1%, you are the 2% that's running businesses. It's hard to have that conversation. It's hard to talk to someone that's not running a business to understand, like, okay, well, this is what it is. This is what you're going through. I've been there. I've gone through it. So
Yeah.
finding that community, or a team or a mentorship group, if you will, that's so necessary to be able to lean on someone. Because in other words, it's very lonely being an entrepreneur. People don't talk about that side of it as well. It's very like,
Yeah, that's
it's
true.
just yourself a lot of times. Even if you have a team around you, it becomes like, okay, but you're making the decisions. So who do you have to speak to? How do you have to get counsel from? And so that's also so important. Lastly, Gray, 2024, Destination Design Con next year, 2025. What is next? How are you gonna have us stay on the cutting edge and be that anchor in that space of meaning in the design community?
Well, I think, I think we sort of stay on the cutting edge by riding on the coattails of great designers. I mean, we just, our whole thing is to raise the profile of designers. And so I think that's how we stay relevant, is just by, seeking out the work of others.
Yeah.
Sharing that with the world of, this is what is being done, this is what can be done, and this is why design is important.
Yeah, being that catalyst, being that connector, if you will, and
Yeah.
highlighting those that are doing amazing work, not just in the Northwest, but throughout the world. Uh, Shawn, thank you for coming on. This is exciting. Maybe we can plan this like a yearly thing. We can put it in, knock on wood again. We're going to be here 2025. Let's get a market update of what's going on with Gray. But until I am next time in Seattle again, or until I see you next, or we have the interior design tour in Arizona,
There
I
we
know
go.
I'll be talking to you soon.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very flattered that you'd want to talk with me about this, but
Absolutely.
hopefully there's, some good info in there to help some people out.
I'm sure a lot of people what you talked about, not only like I said, as a woman entrepreneur, as a successful entrepreneur, someone that's been in business for over a decade, not just design, right, but just been in business and been an entrepreneur over a decade. There's plenty of things they can pull from and learn from. So I thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I'm excited for this episode to go live.
All right. Well, thank you,
I,
Brandon.
I'll talk
Bye.
to you soon. Bye.